off in about 30 seconds. We're just going to give everyone a chance to get into the room.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Greatly appreciate the time and putting everything together for platform to be able to help answer questions and help solve mysteries. If there's anything that we found out in the last 14 days that has to do with the CARES Act, is that even though the bill was passed, that means that everything is still subject to change, every day, literally every day in a lot of cases, it seems like. So, ultimately what I would like to do is just to provide a very high level overview of the financial packages that are out and available right now, financial relief packages that are out and available right now for dentists. And then from there, open up the conversation to just questions and answer, Q&A that's in the chat within the group Zoom chat. So anything that comes to mind or any questions that you would like to bring up ahead of time or as we're talking or as I'm talking, certainly feel free to open the chat box and go ahead at that point in time and add in your questions. So that's where we're going to be pulling questions from, is specifically from the chat box. So really, ultimately, when this entire issue began to unfold, really there was a couple of different, the very first thing was going to be a economic injury disaster loan program, right? Which is, as soon as the United States was declared a national emergency disaster area, essentially, then at that point in time, anybody and everybody could apply for what's called an economic injury disaster loan. So what an economic injury disaster loan is it's a loan directly between you as a business owner and the SBA in order to receive funding under the economic injury disaster loan program. Now, you can't dictate and say, here's how much I want. What they do is they tell you, here's how much you're going to get when we start hearing some of these loan options come back, loan offers come back from the SBA. Eventually, they're not set up to receive the mass amounts of applications or the mass amounts of people that wanted to receive these funds. And so ultimately, we're hoping that maybe by the end of the month, we'll start seeing more movement there. But nonetheless, what an economic injury disaster loan is for is it's there to help you pay for business expenses that have to do with running your business in a time of an economic disaster or a declared national disaster or disaster area, which the entire United States is right now, good, bad, or indifferent. So, but ultimately, really our recommendation, our thought for our clients is to have somewhere from 6 to 8 weeks of cash on hand to be able to navigate the storm. Now, that means just really cash for rent if you can't get a deferment, cash for whatever minimal costs you have for insurance and advertising and your advertising contracts and your software contracts, that type of, those types of expenses. Really, payroll, which is the single biggest dental practice expense, that your team members, while your office is closed, should be on unemployment and receiving unemployment and getting paid by the unemployment system. And they're going to be okay because they're also going to be receiving anyway the $600 weekly pandemic assistance from the federal government that was a part of the CARES Act that was passed on the 18th of March. So don't feel bad for them. Ultimately, they're going to be okay. But really, the economic injury disaster loan is something that we're recommending that every dentist apply for in order to receive hopefully some amount of funding from it. And to do that is really just, even if you just put the money in an account and it sits there as a treasure chest, so to speak, or a war chest of cash, it's really going to be helpful to navigate the next 6 to 8 weeks while your office is presumably going to be closed. Now, and why do we recommend it? You can't get cheap money, at this point in time from anywhere else or with as much ease. So 3.75% interest rate, up to a 30-year amortization, no payments for 12 months. So really, at the end of the day, it's very low interest rate loan, so to speak, very easy, flexible terms, and no prepayment penalties. And so even if you got the money, you put it in an account and then you paid it back to the SBA in 6 months from now, and you feel better about life, then it helps from having that cash on hand, just from a security blanket perspective, because none of us know how long this is going to go, I think is the worst thing here. So we need to prepare for 6 to 8 weeks, but it very well may be 4 months, as far as we know, but let's hope not. So plan for the worst, hope for the best is our thought process there. And that's why we're recommending that dentists start with the SBA 7B loan, which is the economic injury disaster loan, directly with the SBA. Fast forward a couple weeks then, and Congress passed what is called the CARES Act. And as part of the CARES Act, it also allowed for a new subset of the 7A loan program, SBA 7A loan program, which I'm sure all of you have heard of by now. All of you have been feverishly digging into and looking into the specifics and talking with whoever it may be about it. But ultimately, the 7A loan program, the Paycheck Protection Program, is designed for businesses that are operating at a diminished capacity, that still have payroll, that is paying their team, having to either choose to lay off some of their team members or cut their hours, but cut their hours to a point where they're not subject or eligible for unemployment at that point in time. And so therefore, but they're not receiving enough revenue as a business to be able to continue to pay their employees at the level that they want to pay them, or the level that they have been paying them, in order to keep their payroll in place. So that's the purpose of the Paycheck Protection Program. And really, it's supposed to be a very quick and easy way to get funds in order to cover your payroll, rent, and utilities, essentially for a 2-month period, an 8-week period. And the 7A Paycheck Protection Program loan has some forgiveness features to it, where ultimately you could get your part of your loan forgiven once you apply to have it forgiven, and you provide all the supporting documentation, all the information, etc. Your bank looks at it, says yes, it's eligible. They send it off to the SBA, and the SBA then has 60 days to get back to your bank in order to finally approve your loan forgiveness. So keep in mind, this 7A loan is a loan, and it has to be forgiven, and you're going to be responsible for any amount that doesn't get forgiven. So you have to keep that in mind whenever you're deciding whether or not to take funds or not, and whether or not, when you're timing your funds, and when you're applying for the loan, and when you're going to receive the loan funds, what your 8-week period looks like, etc. So that's a really high level overview of the Paycheck Protection Program and of the economic injury disaster loan program, that are the 2 different financial relief options that are available to dentists right now at a national level. And so ultimately, which one makes sense to you or makes sense for you is going to depend on your facts and circumstances. But there's a pretty general overview, or pretty general consensus as to what is a good reason to have one versus a good reason to have another. And then really the question becomes, when do you apply for one or the other? So, please feel free if you have specific questions that if you want to ask. We've got a significant amount of questions from Q&As that we've done otherwise, but ultimately I'm here to answer your guys' questions specifically, which is ultimately my goal. So anybody that has a question, you can put it into the chat down at the very bottom. You'll see a chat box. When you click on it, it should bring open a window that'll allow you to type your question to there. We're going to be pulling questions directly out of the chat box on an as-needed basis, but otherwise we'll I'll continue to just some questions that we've heard from many other doctors through doing lots of these question and answer sessions with specifically with other doctors and other groups of doctors. So, so one of the first questions was if a sole proprietor in California can receive unemployment. And the short answer there is yes. So part of the CARES Act was the federal government required state governments to relax their unemployment policies, essentially. And so two of the items that were there that are important to you and your team are, if you're a sole proprietor, one of the items that's important is that they require the state to include sole proprietors, or what's called self-employed individuals, so partners of a partnership, sole proprietors, and single member LLCs that are filing their tax returns as a sole proprietor, in order to include them in the unemployment program. And so what we're seeing is that the states are behind, and they're not rolling the program out quickly. But in order to receive the federal pandemic assistance, the $600 a week per person on unemployment from the federal level, they're going to have to loosen that and include or allow self-employed individuals, including sole proprietors, to participate in the unemployment programs. And so your team members, the second item that was impacted that is helpful for team members, specifically in you, would be that the elimination of the waiting period. So before, there was a waiting period before you'd be able to allow to receive unemployment benefits. That has to be eliminated and therefore become immediately eligible. Next question is whether or not the sole proprietor can receive a disaster grant, and so absolutely. So any business is eligible for the disaster grant. Had you filed already through the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, you could check a box to be considered for receiving the $10,000 disaster grant. Any business is eligible to request that. It's just a matter of going through that process. Great question. Hopefully that answered your question. Next question: what happened to the PPP application process? That's a fantastic question. So we're wondering the exact same thing. We're seeing a change on a fairly regular basis. Every day it seems like there's a change from the SBA, a change from the federal government, a change from every single bank out there. Ultimately, the way the process works is that the CARES Act was signed, right? So now we have the bill, and then the SBA has to then take that bill and they have to then issue what are called guidelines, right? It's called the interim final rule. And the interim final rule is essentially the playbook that then the SBA hands to banks, and every bank out there that's SBA preferred partner then receives that final interim final rule. And from there, they interpret it, which is why we're seeing every single bank have different parameters, different protocols, different information that they're requesting, different ways about going about the application process. Everything seems to be different on a bank by bank basis. And so what's happened to the PPP application process. I think anytime you try and roll out something on as large of a scale as this was attempted to be rolled out on, there's going to be a lot of changes and a lot of unknowns. And a lot of opportunity for things to not be clear that need to be clarified, and therefore decisions that are made along the way have to change based on new clarification and new information available. So if you applied early or if you tried to apply quickly, there's definitely some banks at this point in time still on Tuesday don't even have their platform open. Aren't able to accept applications. Some banks like Wells Fargo got in trouble with the regulators for bad banking practices several years ago. So they've been kicked out. Like they've been told like they have a lending cap and they can't lend out any more than what their lending cap was, and so they're done. They're out of the game ultimately. And I think every bank out there is trying to do the best that they can in the short amount of time of trying to get this program put together and get it out to the masses, because they were expecting a massive influx of information and of returns and of people who are trying to seek help through this process. And so, so we're seeing almost every bank that we've seen, their online portals or their online applications have crashed due to their servers and their computer structure not being capable of being able to accept them. The SBA actually crashed yesterday at 10 a.m. So the SBA was not able to accept applications for some time. And the reality just is in most cases that banks just cannot keep up with the volume at this point in time. And so, they don't have enough hands in order to type in information, and their computer systems can't receive enough information that other people type in without crashing. And so ultimately it's what has happened to it? It's tried to roll out something incredibly fast that was incredibly loose, and trying to make the best out of it as best as any way it can. Next question is, has there been clarification as to whether a borrower can choose the loan funding date for the Paycheck Protection Program loan, or whether the bank can choose whether they will allow the borrower to choose the date or not? So it's on a bank-by-bank basis. So we're seeing probably 5, maybe 10% of banks out there will allow the borrower to choose the date in which they originate the loan or close on it. By far, most banks are saying, look, we get the loan number from you. We're going to then put that into the system, and we're going to prepare your closing documents, and then you got to sign them, and we got to get moving on. We're not, we're seeing most banks not allow somebody to defer. Now, there's a lot of people out there that are saying, here's the strategy, here's what you need to do in order to make the best out of it, which sounds great, but the reality is 95% of banks out there that we've talked to already from our client base, and we know what their process is and what their information they're requesting are, et cetera, they're not allowing people to apply and defer. Only a few have, very, very, very few. Dr. Brian Hill said you can't find lenders taking applications, and I think that comes back to most lenders' portals have crashed at this point in time, and they're closed for maintenance. They're trying to get it up. Some banks haven't even been able to get their initial technology in place or their process in place and rolled out fast enough to be able to even deliver and start taking applications to begin with. So I think that what we're seeing is just a crazy influx of catastrophic influx of information to these banks that are not capable of taking the volume. So I've laid off my staff at this point. Which loans should I apply for rent and utilities? So if you've laid off your team, the best option for you at this point in time would be the 7B, the economic injury disaster loan, directly with the SBA. That could be used to pay off your rent and your utilities. That's the loan that's going to have no payments for 12 months, have up to a 30-year amortization, and be on a 3.75 fixed % interest rates. Yeah. So if I already have an existing SBA loan for my practice, can I still apply for the EIDL and for the PPP loan? So in the event that you already have an SBA loan for your practice, great news, you're actually going to receive 6 months of the SBA paying your payment for you automatically, assuming that it's an SBA 7A program and it fell within a certain time frame of being open and being there, as long as it was open prior to a certain point in time, which most are earlier this year. Then you're going to receive 6 months of your payments and your interest, your principal and interest paid by the SBA on your behalf, which is nice. And if you have an existing SBA 7A loan, you absolutely can apply for the economic injury disaster loan and the Paycheck Protection Program loan. You can't apply for the Paycheck Protection Program loan multiple times or with multiple institutions, multiple banks, but you absolutely can apply for both of them still at this point in time. Is an S corporation considered a corporation or a sole proprietor? So S corporation would be considered a corporation. A sole proprietor is a very specific form of business entity, and that means that you don't have a corporation or an LLC to practice business. You're just, you yourself as an individual are out there practicing business, opening a business and running a business as a sole proprietor. Any type of corporation or an LLC is not going to be a sole proprietor. It's going to be a corporation or an LLC. After applying for the economic injury disaster loan, is there any further application through the SBA prior to applying for a PPP at the bank? So you can apply for both. You don't have to wait on one in order to apply for the other. You just have to consider whether or not, when it makes sense for you to apply for the Paycheck Protection Loan Program at the bank. And so if you wanted to apply right now, and there's pros and cons to both, applying right now or waiting. And if you're wanting to apply right now, you don't have to wait on your economic injury disaster loan to come through and be finished. You can absolutely apply now, and you could apply for both if you wanted. Can I choose my start date to activate my PPP loan? Depends on your bank. Check with your bank and whether or not they will allow you to delay your closing. Most banks won't, so just keep that in mind. Wells Fargo, yeah, they've got their hands slapped. So question is, I received email from Wells Fargo saying they met their $10 billion loans. Yeah, they've got their hands slapped because of bad business practices, and so they can't lend out more than $10 billion. So you'll have to find another bank, unfortunately, because of that. Are there any banks that will take an application for a borrower is not one of their current clients? That's a fantastic question. And so we're having a very difficult time finding a true bank to take a question, or excuse me, to take an application from a borrower who is not their existing client. What we are seeing is that some online financial technology companies that are technically not banks, but have set their process and their program up in order to receive applications and apply on behalf of consumers. And so your best bet is going to be to check with your local banks around your area. If you have accounts at any existing local bank, we're seeing local and regional banks deal with this issue better than national banks are. And the major mega banks, they're probably dealing with it the worst overall. Not necessarily, but that's just as a generality is what we're seeing there. So if your bank is no longer accepting applications, then you'll have to go and check with another bank around in your area, or that you've had some kind of relationship with over time. Okay, if you have multiple dental clinics, can you apply for multiple Paycheck Protection Program loans? If they're in multiple corporations, yep, you absolutely can. You're going to need a different Paycheck Protection loan package essentially for each different business that you have. So each different dental corporation. So say that you're a dentist and you own 3 different dental corporations with 3 different sets of payroll, 3 different staffs, et cetera, then you're going to have 3 different Paycheck Protection Loan Program applications out eventually, whenever you get to that process. Has anyone received any kind of economic injury disaster loan funds at this point in time? No, we've not. In fact, we just heard out of the entire Academy of Dental CPAs. So we belong to a national group of CPA firms that are similar to us. We work with about 10,000 dentists nationwide. And we've heard from the first one that they heard, that they had a client who received a request for further information, exactly what we thought was going to happen from the SBA for their economic injury disaster loan. But no, nobody to our knowledge has actually had funds paid at this point in time or received any cash. What is the forgiveness on the 7B? So the forgiveness on the 7B, there is no forgiveness on the 7B. I'm sorry, the 7B is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. It is not a loan that is going to be forgiven. It is a loan that is 3.75% interest rate, no payments for 12 months, up to a 30-year amortization, and has no forgiveness functionality to it whatsoever. What banks are allowing you to postpone closing the loan until reopen your practice? We've not seen any national banks, so they're all local banks in different parts of the country. So check with your bank and your banker and find out if they would allow you to. How is the economic injury disaster loan forgivable? It's not. The economic injury disaster loan is not forgivable. It is a loan that you're going to have to pay back. So definitely keep that in mind. If you have reduced hours and reduced staffing, can you still apply for both loans? Absolutely, you can apply for both loans. If you want to have consideration for your 7A Paycheck Protection Program loan to be forgiven, that is where you're going to end up having to make sure that your team is hired back for an 8-week period, immediately beginning, the day that your loan originates. So let's say that your loan originates on, I don't know, April 15th. The SBA is moving really fast, your bank's moving really fast, and you get your funds on April 15th. Well, let's say your office is closed until some period of time still. That still means that if you want to have the loan 100%, or not 100% forgiven, but as much of it as that can be forgiven as possible, then you're going to have to employ your employees, bring them back at that point in time on April 15th, and employ them all the way through that 8-week period, which is the covered period, in order to receive the funding, right? So that brings us forward to, say, June 15th. But there's also a caveat that you also still have to have them employed on June 30th in order to receive those funds as forgivable. And so in that particular case, now you're also going to have to come out of pocket if your office is not open at the end of your 8 weeks, and make sure that you can pay out of your own pocket for that last, the time frame between when your 8 weeks is over and June 30th. So if you've got reduced hours or staff is reduced at this point in time and they should be on unemployment, highly consider that route. That's the route that I would do if it were me. But you absolutely can still apply for both. It's just a matter of what makes the most sense for your practice situation. What if one of my employees decides not to return to work to be rehired because of the risk of infection? It reduces the salary wages by more than 25%. Will I not be considered for forgiveness because the payroll is not maintained at a pre-crisis level? So what we believe is that it's going to end up being reduced. Your forgiveness amount would be reduced on a basis as your funds are not, as you don't meet the criteria for your funds to be forgiven. We don't believe that it's going to be an all or nothing. But frankly, we don't have the loan forgiveness application and process hasn't been created yet. So that's the scary part. So if you get the funds now, we don't know exactly what the forgiveness aspect is going to look like later at this point in time. And we're still waiting, and we're going to be waiting, I imagine, because they still haven't got the entire program on the front end rolled out yet, let alone worried about 8 weeks on the back end. How far back can you go to cover your expenses of the PPP loan? You can't. It's only for the 8-week period from the date that your loan originates to the point in time 8 weeks later. So the question is, can you use expenses from a prior period in order to use the fund, or use the funds from a PPP loan in order to pay expenses in a prior period? And the answer is no. You can't use the funds from a PPP loan now to use the fund to pay expenses in a prior period. You have to incur and pay the expenses between the point in time where your loan originates and 8 weeks later in order to be considered for forgiveness. Do we think that the $350 billion is enough? I don't have a crystal ball. I imagine it's probably not enough. I imagine, they've been talking on the news nonstop about going back to Congress, asking for more money. The Secretary of the Treasury has done that on national news. Congressmen have done that on national news. So I have to imagine that there's going to be another tranche of funds that are going to be coming, and that's certainly something to consider. We've got an email drafted out to anybody that's on our contact list for updates and guidance and just general overall high-level information from with respect to the financing relief packages, et cetera, that is going to go out tomorrow, later afternoon tomorrow. And one of the things on that is like, here are your options at this point in time as we see them. Here is the worst case scenarios based that could happen, and really it's a personal decision on a case by case basis that you have to make in order to choose. Do you want to apply now or do you want to wait? But in my personal opinion, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to apply now if your office is closed. Just the risks don't outweigh the rewards, in my opinion. But no, I don't necessarily think $350 billion is enough, and I think they're going to have to go back to the well, so to speak, on that. Okay, if you're a solo proprietor practice with no employees and your practice opens, can you get the PPP forgiveness with $10,000 for your wages, utilities, and rent? So there, it's gonna depend on a lot of different factors. Way too much to get into today. But talk with your CPA, find out how you could be eligible, if you're eligible, et cetera, in order to answer your specific question if you don't have any employees, because there's way too many factors in there to be able to get into today. If I applied for the $10,000 emergency funds, is that considered on my application for? If I applied for the $10,000 emergency funds, is that considered my application for the 7B from the SBA, or is there an additional application that needs to be completed? So that basically got you in line. So really what the SBA said is we have way too many people to be able to receive 7-page applications with entire financial packages in order to then process those in any kind of timely manner whatsoever. So what the SBA decided to do was to turn the process on its head, have everybody fill out essentially a contact form. And to fill out this contact form, that's you standing in line now. And then they're going to weed out people from that basic information that they receive that they're not even going to consider for economic injury disaster loans. And then they're only going to reach out to the people who they are going to consider based on the criteria and the parameters that were included in that initial contact form. So no, that was not your application. We've seen the only person that we've heard of that has received any kind of feedback or response from the SBA was asking for a whole bunch of information, essentially asking for all the information that was on the previous, the old version of the economic injury disaster loan package. They're just asking for that on the back end. Do we have to repay first the $10,000 for the economic injury disaster loan if you receive it? Typically speaking, that's considered a grant. In most cases, it's going to be considered a grant, and you will not have to pay it back. Okay. Can you decide when you take the loan, once it's the PPP loan, once it's approved, start the 8 weeks from there and must end before June 30th? So there's a couple of different things I think is important here. Is one, the loan funds don't have to be used by June 30th. The time frame to apply and the program is open through June 30th. And so the only way that banks can apply for it for you is if they do by June 30th. The funds don't have to be used by June 30th. So say your origination date starts on on June 15th. That means you have 8 weeks from June 15th, spanning over the June 30th timeline, that date, spanning over June 30th, and to continue using your funds in that 8-week period that started on your origination date. And then most banks are not allowing you to decide when to take the funds. Most banks are saying, hey, when we offer them to you, you gotta do it. So so Wells Fargo didn't run out of money. Wells Fargo got in trouble because of Bad Banking Practices Act. So they got their hands slapped. So they got in trouble. Wells Fargo didn't run out of money. They just got in trouble. So you have to choose a different bank. Is unfortunately what that comes down to. They got in trouble. Is it true that the 7A loan can be forgiven for lease payments, mortgage on practice loan, and utilities, mortgage interest? So the 7A PPP loan can be forgiven for expenses incurred in an 8-week period from your point of origination date, specifically for covered payroll costs, specifically for rent, so your commercial rental space, for utilities, and for mortgage interest payments. That is correct. Thank you, Jonathan. Says if we want to take a quick break for a drink, lots of talking and questions. I finished my water already, so I may take you up on that here in a minute, but we'll keep going for now. Okay, so if one of my employees, here's a great question, one that I feel like is really important for everybody. If one of my employees does not come back, they choose not to come back, can I hire another to replace that person for the employee count? Absolutely. That's what we're going to see happen. Ultimately, if your employee decides not to come back to work because of whatever reason that they have, they are choosing to not work at that point in time. And if they're choosing to not work at that point in time, not only are they not eligible for unemployment at a state or federal level, they are also choosing to give up basically their position in your practice. And you absolutely should hire somebody else to fill that position in order to have your full-time equivalent employee count in. Can I use the economic injury disaster fund loan funds to pay debt and expenses from before the loan was approved? You absolutely can. So what we're recommending is to make sure that you've contacted all of your lenders and asked for a period for your debt to be deferred. So your existing loan payments to be deferred to a future period. So we're seeing most lenders at this point in time are giving anywhere from a 90-day to a 6-month deferral for their clients and their customers. So definitely ask for your debts to be deferred. And if you have expenses that are piled up from before the economic injury disaster loan was approved and you've been funded, you absolutely can use those for any kind of business expenses that are paid, that have been brought up and accrued from before you receive the funds. So there is some overlap where in some gray area where we believe in the safest route would be that to not use the economic injury disaster loan funds for payroll or payroll related issues, dollars, in order to make sure that you steer clear of not being eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program loan. So I'm recommending to our clients, we're recommending to our clients to use the economic injury disaster loan funds for non-payroll related business expenses. But if that's from before you receive the funds or after you receive the funds, that makes no difference whatsoever. So you certainly can do that. As an S corporation business owner, we put our employees on furlough. What loans can we qualify for? And do we have to rehire our employees to qualify for any financial aid? So you can apply for both the economic injury disaster loan and the Paycheck Protection Loan Program. Even if you've put all of your team on furlough or laid them off or they're just not working, you absolutely can apply for both of them and you can qualify for both of them. It just depends on the stipulations, all the stipulations within the specific loan programs as to whether or not you're going to qualify. Having put your team on furlough or laid them off has no bearing on that. In order to receive the forgiveness aspect of the 7A loan under the Paycheck Protection Program, you will have to hire them back and employ them for an 8-week period subsequent to your loan originating or closing. And that, and ultimately, there's some tripwires in there specifically. So work with your CPA to make sure that you're receiving that you're navigating that properly and you don't get tripped up on having your funds forgiven. What qualifies the PPP loan to be forgiven? So we're not 100% sure, all of the tripwires there because the application for forgiveness isn't even available yet. They've not put together a program. Everything is purely speculative. But what we do know is that covered payroll costs, rent, utilities, and mortgage interest are going to be qualifying costs, covered costs that are going to be eligible for forgiveness. So don't be surprised if not all of your 7A Paycheck Protection Loan Program loan is not forgiven. It would surprise me if 100% is. It would not surprise me if it's not. If I own our space, here's another great question. If I own our space, I think this applies to a lot of dentists out there. So say that you own your dental practice and it's through a separate entity, a real estate corporation. Can I pay rent to my real estate corporation as normal and use the PPP loans to fund use the PPP loan funds to pay this rent? Absolutely. As long as your lease was in effect, in force, before February 15th, 2020, even if you rent your dental practice rents from another corporation, a rental LLC that you also own, absolutely can. And here's the trick here, or here's the kicker here. You got to make sure that you had a lease in force before before February 15th, 2020. And we expect this to be an audit item that they're going to look at. That's going to carry significant penalties if this is not done properly. And ultimately, if you can't just magically today have a lease that appears for executing on January 31st for a February 1st rent check that quadrupled compared to all of your other rent checks the month prior. So we fully expect that to be an item that the SBA is going to come back and really scrutinize when there's an affiliate relationship there between the person who received the funds, the PPP funds, and their landlord. And the company that's receiving the rent from the company. So keep that in mind. That could be something that could get you in trouble if you don't do it right, for sure. Another great question. What payroll expenses should we use for applying and forgiveness? So we're using the payroll, we're using health insurance premiums paid, we're using pension expense. So which is the match or the safe harbor non-elective, the profit sharing component, and the cash balance component for the trailing 12 months. So we've got the wrapping in that entire amount and then determining the average monthly payroll based on that. So you cannot. So another question somebody has: if they're a sole proprietor now, can they incorporate and then take home salary using the PPP funds. No, whatever you were, the PPP funds are based on, whatever legal type of entity that you were, and the amount of payroll dollars that were associated with that legal entity in 2019, or for a trailing 12 months ending, I think 2/28/2020. But if you're a sole proprietor, you can apply for the PPP loan, assuming that your income is over $100,000 for the year. You can apply for an average monthly amount of $8,333, and you can still pay yourself that as a sole proprietor with the PPP funds. So you absolutely can. You don't have to change your legal entity type in order to receive any kind of benefit there. I'm going to take probably 2 more questions and then take a 2-minute break real quick here, guys. So will we be taxed on the PPP or the economic injury disaster loan as income? So great question here. So the economic injury disaster loan is a loan. So you wouldn't be taxed on it, just like you wouldn't be taxed on if you went to Bank of America or if you went to Wells Fargo in order to receive a loan from them. So you're not going to get taxed on that in any way, shape, or form. The question really becomes, or is, on the forgiveness portion of the Paycheck Protection Program loan. So normally, if you don't pay a loan and you receive forgiveness, that loan forgiveness normally would be taxed. But as a part of the CARES Act, it specifically excluded the forgiveness portion of the CARES Act from being taxable income. So it's not going to be taxable income specifically. The forgiveness portion of the 7A Paycheck Protection Program loan is not going to be considered income for the purposes of taxes. So you're going to get that once you get that forgiveness, assuming that there's economic benefit for you, you're not going to have to pay tax on the amount that you're forgiven. Okay, last question, then we'll take a quick break. Once you receive funds and rehire your employees, do they have to stop collecting unemployment once they're rehired? Absolutely. So the way that the unemployment system works is that every week they go and every week they have to reapply. Essentially, they have to say, here's how much I've worked, here's how much I've earned. And once they've been rehired, once you've rehired them, whether or not you take the funds now or you wait and you reapply later, once you rehired them and your office is back open, they absolutely have to stop. Absolutely have to stop receiving unemployment. So, Jonathan, are you cool with taking like a 2-minute break, 3-minute break?
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm gonna, just talk to the chat really quick and go ahead and take a break.
I will be right back. I'm gonna go grab some water.
I appreciate it. Drew, this is awesome. I think everyone in the audience appreciates what you're doing. It's kind of a fireside chat and a lot of good questions. Hopefully it's what everyone expected. And if you have questions, definitely put them in the chat. These calls are for you guys to kind of figure out what's going on. And I've asked all these presenters to have content and topics that's absolutely pertinent to this current situation that we're going through. Tomorrow we've got Jean St. Louis coming on. She's going to talk about communications with the staff and the patients and the office and what you could do to take advantage of this time while it's closed. And then Thursday we've got a great presentation about, buying and selling a practice and transitioning in. It's an interesting time when these economic crises come. We find that a lot of associates eat last. I hate to say it. And when people go back to work, the associates are the last ones to get to work. So they're going to be looking to transition and basically buy a job is what they're doing. If you guys have topics you want to cover, I've got a wealth of speakers lined up. Next week, we're going to have Lee Maddox, a former broker, a dental attorney, a dentist. His resume is pretty extensive. He's going to come on and talk with us. But anything you guys want to see, I was thinking about social media. I see a lot of the dentists I work with, I track their social media. There's a lot of great patient communications going out right now. How they're communicating with their staff, how they're communicating with their patients. It's an unprecedented time and it's a very unique event. And, I think we're going to come out on the other side of this doing things a little differently than what we've been doing currently. So any topics you guys want to see, please go ahead and send me some suggestions. And if you want to keep accumulating some questions there in the chat group, Drew's going to come back and he's going to hit on some more of those. So I'd love to unmute you guys all right now, but if you want to say anything, you can say it through the chat box.
Perfect.
Drew, if you're no longer parched and you're ready,
I've now got my water replenished. So
Listen, we appreciate this so
Ready
much.
to roll.
This is awesome stuff. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're going to be respectful of everybody's time. We'll get through to, another probably 12 minutes or so of Q&A, and then be able to wrap it up from there. So probably won't get to everybody's questions. So I'm sorry. Maybe we'll have more of these, or be able to do. Hopefully you've got a lot of information from everybody else's questions at this point in time, but definitely check, highly encourage you to check with your CPA and work with them in order to do anything that you need to do to get through this process. So, okay, next question. If you pay yourself from an S corporation and you have somewhat decent March, should you run a normal payroll for yourself if you filed for unemployment on 3/31? So I think it depends on the facts and circumstances surrounding the 12-month period. You have to understand how the Paycheck Protection Program works, and what the loan balance is based on. It's based on an average monthly payroll for one of two payroll periods in time, either 2019 or for the trailing 12 months, ending the month before that, this entire shindig started. So I think it's as of 2/29/2020. So the trailing 12 months behind that. And so, as most doctors are going to see, themselves being over that $100,000 annual salary or $100,000 of annual payroll cost as is. And so really it's not going to do you any good in order to do that in most cases. But again, hopefully your CPA understands that the parameters around this, what it's work, and what this program is, and definitely work with them to find out, whether or not it makes sense in your particular set of facts and circumstances. I would venture to guess it won't make any difference, but without knowing everything about it. If I forgo my personal payroll from March, get loan funds in April, can I increase my payroll for the 8 weeks to cover the payroll I did not take in March? No. I'm reading that as can I, if I forgo my personal payroll, so meaning can you pay yourself more in April or once you receive the funds in order to have those funds then covered? No. The answer is no. The forgiveness portion is going to be limited to a very specific amount. It's going to be limited to $8,333 per employee. So you can't pay yourself more. You can't pay more than $8,333 to yourself as an employee, because no employee can earn more than $8,333 and have their portion of that compensation forgiven. So what you're going to see is that associate doctors, the owner doctors, et cetera, are going to be over that threshold, and only a certain amount up to $8,333 are even eligible as a covered cost for forgiveness. Okay. Okay. So is it correct that me as an employer and me as an employee cannot use my deferral as a part of how much? Okay. Moving on. What payroll taxes can be used to calculate for the PPP application and expensing after funding. And so ultimately it's so you use your gross payroll in order to start with the calculation for the application. And then for the forgiveness period, we know for sure that the employer's portion of FICA and Medicare are going to be excluded from your forgiveness aspect. So you'll have to pay those on behalf of the employee, but you won't get those dollars forgiven. I applied for an economic injury disaster loan in mid-March and haven't received any kind of confirmation. Is there a way that I can check to see if my application was received and accepted? So you can call the SBA and find out if they have any record of you is going to be the best option. If you applied in mid-March, if you applied, I think in the last 10 days, it would have been on you would have opened up your case with the SBA online and received a registration number. At that point in time, those registration numbers would be confirmation that your case was open, and that's what you would be used to call the SBA. If you mailed it in or faxed it in or uploaded it on the old system previous to that, you'll just have to call them and talk to somebody and hope that you can get get through to somebody who's knowledgeable there. Okay, so a couple of good questions. Can I use idle funds to pay for dental equipment and education payments? Absolutely, you can use it for any kind of expenses, business expenses. We're recommending that are not payroll related specifically. But I would keep in mind, the purposes of the idle loans are to be able to make sure that you have adequate capital to weather 6 to 8 weeks, or to replenish your stores, your capital stores, if you've used your money to weather 6 to 8 weeks. And so ultimately, I would hold off on any large equipment purchases at this point in time for a period into the future. And I would not, if you're applying for the idle loans and that's your lifeblood, so to speak, to make it through the next 6 to 8 weeks, I would find as many free education as you possibly can, and I would defer any kind of large clinical education expenses or any kind of large equipment purchases at this point in time. Another great question: Can I apply for unemployment even if I'm seeing emergency patients? And the answer is yes. You can apply for unemployment even if you're seeing emergency patients, especially if you are an employee, because you're not on payroll at this point in time. You've been laid off as an employee or furloughed as an employee yourself. So you absolutely can apply for unemployment. Does getting unemployment disqualify you from the Paycheck Protection Program? Or no, it does not at this point in time. Okay. If you get the $10,000 idle grant and use it immediately for costs like rent, will it still be subtracted from your future PPP loan forgiveness? Yes. The answer is yes. You can't have your total amount of loan forgiveness under the PPP program and receive the $10,000 idle grant. It's a total of so it's the PPP loan eligible for forgiveness minus 10,000 or the 10,000. You can't have both. I applied on March 27th for the I assume that's for the economic injury disaster loan, and have not heard back. Do I need to fill out a new form? I would not fill out a new form. Hopefully, when you applied on March 27th, you received a registration number. I would not apply again. You can call and find out, but hardly anybody has heard back, so don't feel bad. And I would not call. I would not worry about it, and I would definitely not fill out a new form at this point in time. Can I use my deferral? So I assume this is meaning, can I use my 401k deferrals and the 2.5 calculation and reimbursement under PPP? So the payroll cost starts with the gross payroll, which is pre your deferral. Your deferral comes out of the gross payroll. So you absolutely can use you can include your deferral essentially, because you're starting with your gross payroll. Does applying for unemployment in the future become a problem in getting other loans? As far as we know, no. Nothing that's out there right now is going to be an issue. So we don't know what the future holds, but we could say that anything is available right now. Applying for unemployment now does not negatively impact any issue, provide any negative implication for any loan financial assistance that's available right now. So hopefully that answered your question there. I was underpaid and my wife I was underpaid and my wife doctor as well prior. Okay, I'm not sure if you clarify your question there just a little bit so I can understand. If you were an S Corp, should you just take a distribution at this time only to cover your personal expenses? Yeah, you absolutely, if you're an S corporation, you should not be on payroll at this point in time as an employee. There's no need to pay the extra payroll taxes at this point in time. We wanted to conserve capital. We don't want to give the government 15% of every dollar that we're paying up to the Medicare and FICA limits. So absolutely, if you're an S corporation, you should only be taking distributions at this time for just your absolute necessary personal expenses. I was underpaid, and my wife doctor as well. I am one employee short. Can I increase my salary a little? It's going to depend on all your facts and circumstances. You can map out how you're going to use your funds and what the who's going to be your FTEs, what those are going to count for, and who's going to qualify as those. And then you can look and say, okay, depending on who you were paying and how you were paying them before, during your initial period, as compared to your 8 weeks deferral period, the answer is maybe, but you need to map it all out and make sure you have a good understanding and a good game plan there to maximize your forgiveness funds. Can I use funds to matching 401k to include I believe that's saying to include for the Paycheck Protection Program, and you can absolutely use the matching 401k contribution as a retirement expense for determining your average monthly payroll cost. So next question is, I'm a 1099 independent contractor. Bank of America denied my loan application because of not having a business line of credit with them. What do you recommend? So they were doing that at first. My understanding is maybe on Sunday they released a press release that they were no longer going to require that somebody had a previous lending relationship with them. You have to be a customer, but you don't have to have a previous lending relationship. So try again. I guess is really the only option you have. If the funds used to pay employees payroll, is it for the time they were laid off? No, it's not used for the time they were laid off. While they're laid off, they should be collecting unemployment, filed for and collecting unemployment. The funds to pay employees should be for the 8-week period from the point in time your loan originates through 8 weeks later. So ideally is going to be once your practice is back open. If your practice is not open, your employees should be on unemployment at this point in time. That's the best course of action for you, for them, etc. This is a great question. If we're operating at 50% for emergencies currently, should I have my staff apply for partial employment to make up the difference in their wages? They can certainly apply. It's going to depend on their weekly earnings, how much they are able, how much they're receiving on a weekly basis from the California unemployment, but they're also going to receive the $600 weekly amount from the federal pandemic subsidies eventually. We don't know when, but eventually. And so they can absolutely apply and see if they qualify for it. And in your case, where you're also operating at 50% still, you could also consider applying for the Paycheck Protection Program now. That's a situation where the program is designed for it. It's designed for a business that's operating at 50% capacity. For instance, they don't have the revenue to justify paying their employees 100% of their previous salaries, but they're operating enough where they're not qualifying for unemployment. So you could certainly try the alternative in this case where you're operating at 50% capacity. I would probably go ahead and apply for the Paycheck Protection Loan Program too. Okay, do we know if 1099 expenses are included in payroll? They were originally the formula included 1099 contractors as a part of the payroll cost calculation. However, I think it was maybe Thursday or Wednesday or Friday, sometime late last week, they specifically excluded the 1099 expenses, and now every business has to apply for their own Paycheck Protection Loan Program. So essentially, if you're paying an independent contractor with a 1099, then they're going to have to file for their own Paycheck Protection Loan Program loan with their own bank and deal with it themselves. As a sole proprietor, can I use my 401k match for myself? Absolutely. Yeah, you certainly can. So when you're calculating as a sole proprietor, if you're calculating your Paycheck Protection Loan Program loan average monthly cost, you absolutely can use the 401k match for yourself in any cash balance plan or profit sharing contribution that you've made for yourself in calculating your average monthly pay. That would be covered. And the same thing for the forgiveness on the back end. It would be included as well. So. Jonathan, we got 2 minutes. Should we call it a wrap?
If there's any really good questions there, you want to hit, maybe.
I've got all the way to the end.
Oh, you have. Perfect.
I went as fast. Yeah, I tried to go fast. I got all the way to the end.
So Drew, that was awesome. I appreciate that on behalf of the 80 doctors that are here with us. They appreciate it as well. All their mics are muted, or else we'd have a big round of applause and thank yous. if people want to get a hold of you, I know that you've done me a favor. You've done me a solid by not selling anything or trying to engage people here. They all have CPAs, but what you're doing out there with dentists is nothing short of amazing. If people want to get a hold of you, is there a venue they can use?
Yeah, they can, so ultimately what we're doing just try to, because unfortunately, guys, there is so much misinformation out there. It is so incredibly frustrating. You got CPA firms and you've got HR consultants and HR firms on a national level that are providing all kinds of bad information out there. So what we're trying to do is weed through it as much as possible. We've created specific COVID-19 update email lists, et cetera. So if you want to sign up for that to receive our updates, you could certainly feel free to do that. I post the link in the chat. It's in there a few times. I'll continue to post it here over the next few minutes. So it's just a share.hsforums.com with a whole bunch of crazy letters. So if you go there, you can sign up, and that's just going to put you in to receive our COVID-19 updates. Like I said, the email that we're going to send out tomorrow, has a lot of really good information that hopefully will clarify the options for everybody now and what they can and can't do at this point in time, and help you really think through the process. So.
Awesome, Drew. I appreciate it. Just trying to build some communication and some community through this trying time. And I hope we all appreciate these calls. If you have any friends that want to participate, feel free to send them the contact information and get as many people on the calls as possible. I just expanded my license to accommodate more than 100 people today, to up to 500. The last 2 days, we've had about 80 or 90, and I expect that it's going to grow over time. We're putting together a pretty solid lineup for next week, including having Drew back next Tuesday, which I look forward to, because Drew, my perception is a lot of this information is changing, moment by moment as the government's trying to roll out these subsidies and loans and programs. And I appreciate someone like you that has their finger on the pulse of this and is keeping up to speed with all these updates. So if we could have you back next Tuesday, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to. Happy to be back.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I'll talk to you soon. If you have questions, email me. If there's some topics you want to see, definitely email me, and we'll end it there. Thank you.